Enoch was one of Glasgow's 4 major railway termini, of which only 2 remain today. Opened in 1876, it was taken over by the Glasgow and South Western as their headquarters in 1883. As well as their Scottish services, the South Western partnered with the Midland Railway to provide through services from Glasgow via Kilmarnock, Dumfries and the Settle and Carlisle line to Leeds, the East Midlands and on to London's St Pancras terminal. As this route was both longer and slower than its competitors, the East and West Coast main lines, the Midland South Western combine offered a higher degree of luxury to its passengers, including those travelling third class. The station was closed in 1966 and demolished in 1977. Its site is now occupied by the St Enoch shopping centre. St Enoch had its own underground station on the Glasgow subway, and this is still very busy today. This video is concerned with the southern part of the South Western Main Line in Scotland, from Sanquhar to the border. Sanquhar, in the northern part of Dumfriesshire, and 56 miles from Glasgow by the old Glasgow and South Western Main Line, was a sizable coal mining village, and boasted a large fireworks factory, as well as the oldest working post office in the world. Only the last now remains. Its railway station was closed in 1965, but reopened in 1998 and remains in use today. As we head south from Sanquhar towards Dumfries, the line follows the steep-sided valley of the River Nith. The Enterkin Burn is crossed by a spectacular, but inaccessible, 111-foot high viaduct. The railway track, high above the river, is stabilised by a massive retaining wall. Approximately 10 miles south of Sanquhar is Drumlanrig Castle, seat of the Duke of Buccleuch and Queensberry. The Duke, one of Scotland's greatest landowners, refused to allow the railway within sight of his home, so a deviation became necessary, which involved digging out Scotland's third longest tunnel. Access to the northern portal of the tunnel is impossible, but the 2 ventilation shafts, essential in the days of steam traction, can be reached on foot. When a train passes beneath the shafts, the sound carries for a surprising distance above ground, and includes the eerie sound of the rush of air through the tunnel ahead of the train and behind it. In the days of steam trains, a huge mushroom cloud of steam and smoke would suddenly and spectacularly erupt from the shaft. Passengers travelling through the tunnel have no idea of the bleak but magnificent scenery above them, including the giant radar dome on top of Greenlowther Hill, part of the National Air Traffic Services network. To the south of the tunnel was Carron Bridge Station, closed in 1953. It served the villages of Carron Bridge and Durrisdeer, each about 2 miles away. The old station house is now a private dwelling, and there are some evident remains of the old goods sidings. Immediately south of the station, the Carron Water is crossed by another spectacular viaduct before the line continues to the large village of Thornhill, whose station was closed in 1965. There has been much talk in recent years of reopening Thornhill Station, but it is a mile away from the village, has little or no car parking space, and its buildings have been converted into private dwellings. It does, however, have a passing loop, useful in the days when this route carried a heavy coal traffic, and a signal box to control the traffic, much of it still semaphore signalled. Immediately beyond the station, a small mineral line branched off to serve the Gatelaw Bridge red sandstone quarries. The branch line is gone, and the quarries are now one of Dumfries and Galloway Council's recycling centres. The Campbell Water is crossed by yet another viaduct, before the line continues to Closeburn Station. For once, the station is in the very heart of the village and adjacent to the A76 road, but these facts didn't prevent its closure in 1961. The timber goods shed still stands, and the coal yard is still in operation in 2021. By now, the Nith Valley has widened out, and there are long, straight stretches of track, enabling better speeds to be maintained. The next station towards Dumfries was Aldgirth, serving a small village on the old Dumfries to Kilmarnock road. Although not far from the village, the railway was on high ground, and passengers faced a steep climb before they could catch their trains. The station closed in 1952. In early February 2020, the River Nith, in full flood following Storm Ciara, washed away the embankment of the railway south of Aldgirth. The entire route between Dumfries and Kilmarnock was closed for about 6 weeks, whilst major engineering work was undertaken to rebuild and strengthen the line, which reopened to traffic in mid-March. Another victim of flooding was the viaduct about 2 miles south from this spot, which was replaced in 2004 by a massive new all-steel structure claimed to be the biggest railway bridge built in Britain since the Forth Bridge of 1889. To the south of the viaduct lies Hollywood, originally named Killilong, whose station, situated once again miles from any habitation, closed in 1949. The up platform remains somewhat overgrown, but the main interest is the signal box, which now controls the last wheel-operated level crossing on Network Rail, Scotland. And so on to Dumfries, the biggest town between Kilmarnock and Carlisle. The 1893 Ordnance Survey of Dumfries clearly shows the line to Castle Douglas and eventually on to Stranraer and Portpatrick diverging to the west, whilst the mostly single-track line to Lochmaben and Lockerbie heads northeast. There is no sign of the 18-mile branch up Glencairn to Moniaive, as that didn't open until 1905. It closed in 1943, making it one of the country's shortest-lived railways. And this is all that remains of Moniaive Station in 2020. And so we arrive in the Queen of the South, Dumfries, after a 26-mile journey from Sanquhar. In days gone by, this was a very important place on the railway map, with loco sheds, considerable goods handling facilities, the meeting place for 4 different lines, and the station even gets a mention in T.S. Eliot's Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats. Until the 1980s, there were several through trains for London each day, including overnight sleeping car expresses. Today, it's the only staffed station between Kilmarnock and Carlisle, and rarely sees anything other than the Class 156 units, which appear so often in this video. On a day in the 1980s, the Station Information Board shows through trains between London and Glasgow, London and Stranraer, Blackpool and Stranraer, and even a steam special from Edinburgh via Kilmarnock and Dumfries to Keighley. Changed days indeed. The old bay platforms, on the right in this view, which served the Stranraer and Lockerbie lines, are now a car parking space. Only one signal box remains of the several which once served the immediate area. There isn't another one now until Annan. The Southwestern built its own hotel immediately adjacent to the station. Younger viewers may not realise that the open saloon carriages, which they take for granted today, only began to become commonplace in the 1960s. Before that, both long-distance and local trains used compartment coaches, whose origins lay in the old horse-drawn stagecoach. Leaving the station for Carlisle, one would have seen extensive sidings and another signal box. Nothing remains today, except for the old footpath giving the signalman access to his workplace, almost certainly impassable today. On the outskirts of Dumfries lies the curiously named Isle of Man, whose approach road crosses the track by means of a level crossing utilising a very different technology from that at Hollywood. These two are the only road level crossings between Sanquhar and the border, although there are many uncontrolled foot crossings and farm crossings. The first station to the east of Dumfries was Wracks, serving a small community within easy walking distance. This station opened in 1880, closed in 1965, and its signal box closed 10 years later. The village of Ruthwell is steeped in history. Its church houses one of only two Anglo-Saxon crosses to have survived the Scottish Reformation. Ruthwell was the home of the world's first savings bank, dating from 1810, and Browwell, which played a major part in the death of Robert Burns in 1796. Unfortunately, its railway station was situated about 2 miles from the village, and it was eventually closed in 1965. For the 25 miles between Dumfries and Gretna Green, the line follows the Solway Firth and is more or less straight and level, enabling decent speeds to be maintained. The station at Cummertrees was in the very heart of the village, but that didn't save it. It closed in the Great Railway Massacre of 1965 and is now a private house.
We are now approaching Annan. Please mind the gap when leaving the train.
The Royal Borough of Annan is the third largest town in Dumfries and Galloway. Like Dumfries, until the 1980s it boasted several through trains to London each day, including overnight sleepers. Today, it is an unmanned halt, seeing little but Class 156 sprinters. However, unlike Dumfries, it does at least have a privately owned, licensed bar. Annan has an interesting railway history. Between 1869 and 1921, a line ran from Kirtle Bridge on the Caledonian Railway through Annan and across the Solway Firth to join the Maryport and Carlisle Railway at Brayton. It was designed to accommodate the heavy iron ore traffic which then existed between the mines of northern Cumberland and the ironworks of Lanarkshire and Ayrshire. Although primarily intended for freight traffic, the line also carried passengers, and so Annan had for a time 2 passenger stations, with Annan Shaw Hill being located beside the present-day Tesco superstore. Much of the old trackbed is walkable, and for many years it carried a pipeline to discharge cooling water from the now largely dismantled Chapel Cross nuclear power station into the Solway Firth. The pipeline is still there, but of course no longer in use. The Firth is just over a mile wide at this point, and the railway was carried across on a cast-iron trestle viaduct of somewhat flimsy construction. The line closed to traffic in 1921, but the viaduct wasn't finally demolished until 1935. For many years, it provided a means for the men of Annan to access English pubs on Sundays, when Scottish pubs were closed. 85 years after demolition, the last remains of the viaduct are still standing on the Cumbrian shore. Perhaps it wasn't as flimsy as it might have seemed. 3 miles east of Annan was Dornoch Station, situated midway between the villages of Dornoch and Lowtherton. This was an extremely rural area until 1915, when a serious shortage of shells and ammunition to fight the ongoing Great War led to the formation of a new cordite factory in this part of Dumfriesshire. The word factory is misleading. The establishment spread out over 9 miles from Dornoch, through Gretna and over the border to Longtown in Cumberland. 30,000 men and women came from all over the Commonwealth to work here, and a vast network of railway lines was created to serve the new industry. 2 new townships were established at Eastriggs and Gretna to house these incomers, whose history is recorded and celebrated at the Devil's Porridge Museum at Eastriggs. The little village of Rigg predated the Great War, but its railway station was short-lived. It didn't open until 1904 and closed in 1942, so doesn't appear on any of my Ordnance Survey maps. There's nothing there today but a private crossing. The old station site is now covered by the new A75 road bridge, constructed in the 1990s. Beyond the old station site, the line crosses the Kirtle Water by a 3-arch viaduct. For reasons best known to themselves, British Rail singled the track between Annan and Gretna in 1975, but the line was redoubled between 2006 and 2008 to cope with a heavy coal traffic, which has since disappeared. Gretna Green Station, dating from 1848, like so many others, was closed by British Railways in 1965. It reopened as a single platform in 1993, and a second platform was restored in 2008. After 25 miles of eastward travel, the line now turns to head south toward Carlisle, and strictly speaking, this video should finish here, as this is the end of the Glasgow and South Western line. The final stretch of our journey used running powers on the Caledonian Railway's main line, but since the South Western used the route, let's finish the journey. The tiny River Sark forms the boundary between Scotland and England, so as we cross this bridge, our journey becomes international. Gretna, like Eastriggs, is a product of the First World War and was built to house the huge numbers of munitions workers employed in the area. Although the present Gretna village is in Scotland, the old Gretna station was in England and was merely a junction station. There was no Gretna community when the station was built. It also served the North British Railway branch that joined the Waverley line at Longtown. The old station is now a private house, and presumably is a somewhat noisier residence. As we travel south, there's nothing at Floriston but a level crossing and one solitary cottage. But it had its own station from 1847 to 1950.
Is there? There's really no reason for there to be a station here though, looking around.
There were an awful lot of places round about here, everywhere. Each of these little country stations would have had a station master, a booking clerk, a porter and a signalman. Little wonder that they proved uneconomical. Rockcliffe village was served by a station approximately 1 mile away, and also by Harker station on the North British Railway's Waverley route from Carlisle to Edinburgh. In the years before the First World War, this was a sparsely populated agricultural area. As I turn my camera northward from Rockcliffe Station Bridge, we begin to see what the 20th century had in store for the local people. And so we arrive at our final destination, Carlisle, 115 miles from the old St. Enoch. Citadel Station, as it was known when the city had 3 railway stations, has changed remarkably little over the years, and still retains the layout which dates from its expansion in 1876. The final abolition of steam traction in 1968 and the new roof completed in 2018 have resulted in a bright, airy, modern environment. Carlisle would have been a colourful place in the years before the grouping of 1923, as the station was served by no fewer than 7 different railways, each with its own livery. Citadel Station was owned jointly by the Caledonian Railway and the London and North Western, for many years the world's biggest company. It was also served by the Glasgow and South Western, as well as by its English associate, the Midland Railway. The North British Railway served the Waverley route from Carlisle via Howick and Gala Shields to Edinburgh, as well as the long-gone lines to Port Carlisle and Silloth on the Solway Firth. The North Eastern Railway provided services across the Northern Pennines to Newcastle on Tyne, whilst Northern Cumberland was served by the Maryport and Carlisle, whose goods sheds are still very prominent outside the old Citadel station today. And now, the future of the South Western Line. We have seen that for many years the line provided a major through route for Anglo-Scottish services. It also handled a heavy coal traffic from the Ayrshire coalfield and the Hunterston terminal on the Firth of Clyde to the giant coal-fired power stations of Yorkshire. However, the move away from coal to greener renewable power sources has killed this traffic completely, and the deep-water terminal at Hunterston is being dismantled. There have been persistent calls over the years for the reopening of the old Port Road, the line from Dumfries across Galloway to Stranraer. But this is a very sparsely populated area with few obvious sources of traffic. Important sections of the line have been built upon, and no ferries have operated from Stranraer since 2011. Government suggestions of a bridge or tunnel between Galloway and Northern Ireland blithely overlook the fact that the Irish railways run on a wider gauge than British railways. Through trains would be impossible. In 2016, the West Coast Main Line was closed for 2 months between Carlisle and Glasgow or Edinburgh because of flood damage to the viaduct over the River Clyde at Lamington. The South Western Line enabled a few services to run via the Nith Valley, but the main line is now almost entirely electrically operated, and the old Glasgow South Western has never been electrified, so its value as a relief route is limited. There's a steady passenger traffic between Carlisle and Dumfries, but the long stretch between Dumfries and Kilmarnock carries, at best, a 2-car unit every 2 hours, with longer gaps at certain times of day. Only 2 trains run in each direction on Sundays. What does the future hold for this route? Only time will tell.